don't be afraid. The portfolio won't have it, but when you're talking about it, don't be afraid to talk about the mistakes you made. We all make mistakes. And if there's something that also causes me a little bit of anxiety is when a person can't seem to bring up a real shortcoming, a real mistake, a real challenge, a real obstacle that they had to deal with.
Hello, everyone. Today I'm talking to Paul Bryant, who is a senior UX designer at Amazon in Luxembourg. Paul shares his career journey and his observations about work culture differences between USA and Europe. And we also touch on teaching empathy. We discuss behavioral psychology and the future with AI and learning new tools and how this is essential to being a designer. And we'll also talk about ageism, understanding your natural talents, and much more. Enjoy. Welcome, Paul. Welcome. How's your day?
It was a very good day, Kirill. Thank you.
Long time no chat. Yeah, haven't seen you in a while.
At least a couple of hours.
Right. Okay, so thanks for coming in. Thanks for joining this episode and really being willing to share your wisdom and looking through your profile. And actually, I had to refresh my memory on all your career progression, and I was shocked by the level of details how much you described in the LinkedIn profile. Actually, for all the listeners out there, uh, probably a great example for inspiration. And also, if you want to get another spike of your imposter syndrome feeling, go and look at Paul's profile, and I'll include this in the links as well. But yeah, very impressive. Huge diversity of different roles, different accomplishments, and different companies. Even like your own, you were like a founder of a consultancy, right? You were part of different companies, like agencies and so on. But you started with art director role, looking at least at your profile. So maybe because it looks like that you have a very long journey with very, I guess, diverse set of different roles, as I mentioned earlier. So let's start from the beginning, first of all, and tell me more about the story of coming into UX field. Let's start there.
Okay. Well, as you just noted, the beginning of my career was as an art director, designer, and eventually creative director, mainly because when I came out of design school, there was no UX career. I did work on one of the first Macintoshes. I worked on Adobe Illustrator 1. Um, I was the guy who brought computers to many of these design agencies. I was the person who was hired to kind of digitize the creative process. And then after, I guess it would be about 8 years, uh, I had I was running a creative studio for a company, and this company was investing fairly heavily in new media, and that included something called the internet, which was coming up. And so myself and a couple of colleagues were getting exposed to this new thing, and basically got to start playing with what it meant to design. And we're talking fairly crude things, like very simple, mostly what I would call brochureware websites. But those were the first websites. Nobody, no business. Every business wanted to be in there, but nobody knew what to do. And then looking at some of the first workflows and processes and initial e-commerce, those kinds of things. And when my myself and two of these colleagues started a business in Chicago called Two Way Communications. It was the first interactive firm in Chicago. We there you couldn't hire somebody who had user experience because there was no title. There was no such thing. We started calling it experience design because it was design, but it was this other dimension, this thing of time and movement and space and the like. And actually, a lot of the people I hired were like we would hire architects because they understood this concept of attention and space and focus and movement through processes. Or the only user experience people you could find were people that had worked in the defense industry and had worked on things like cockpits of airplanes.
Oof.
So the initial few steps were rather interesting. But that's how I came to this career.
So looking at first of all, like architects, I've heard actually quite often architect is probably one of the most common transitions, or at least kind of there's like almost like a sibling kind of profession,
Yeah,
because there's like lots of probably like deep thinking and understanding of humans and human behavior and human needs that's involved, like
yeah.
when you're an architect versus when you're a UX designer. So I think there's definitely a huge overlap in different skills that the person would learn, and kind of yeah. I've heard about this transition, or at least kind of this career switch, quite a few times, and yeah, I don't think I had any first-hand experience working with. Maybe I did. Can't recall now. With who used to be an architect, but yeah, I would be curious to experience that. Looking again through your profile on LinkedIn, um, I'm curious to learn more about your. Uh, so how did it? Because at one point you founded a consultancy, right? An agency,
Yep.
and but then you went back to being an employee at a company, and then you've been within this, I guess, type of the career since then. So what made you switch back? What did you miss as a consultant, as a contractor potentially, that you decided to go back?
Well, it's a great question. I think the initial transition back to working for someone wasn't me leaving a company. It was that my company got purchased.
Hmm.
At that time in the late 90s, there were a lot of what we'd call roll ups. There were companies trying to build a large interactive presence, and they would go to different cities and try to acquire an entity that already existed there. So
Hmm.
our business, myself and my partners, were acquired by a group called IXL, Internet Excellence, um, and so yeah, it was kind of interesting because I went from being a principal to being, yeah, I was a senior level, a vice president designer. Um, but that was a really hard move. I've likened it to like it's like giving up your kids for adoption and then moving in with the family because it was really awkward because these people that I had hired and I'd built and I'd cultivated and I'd mentored, all of a sudden I was watching how this new entity was treating them and I didn't always agree with it. It was kind of hard. Um, and so I ended up moving out from there. Now I had wanted to start a business pretty much all of my life. I'd been very interested, very entrepreneurial, kept thinking of things to do. So when this came along, it was an amazing opportunity. Um, but it was also kind of a crazy time because, as I said, nothing had been defined. Every business was throwing money at the internet, and so uh, one of the interesting things is when we sold our company, I didn't quite believe we generated as much value as the money I was being given and the stock I was being given.
Hmm.
And so I was actually fairly conservative with it. I tended to put it away and save it. And that saved me from some of the other consequences that happened at the time where a lot of people went bankrupt because suddenly the stock changed, the world changed. So let me jump from that. And then I moved from that was Chicago, and I moved from Chicago to Seattle for an opportunity. And I was running multiple web properties for a large insurance firm um, as part of a big company turnaround. And something had started to occur to me is I kind of didn't like the the aspects of being in this senior leadership role because you were kind of never off. You're we were always available. You had to be available by cell phone all the time. Um, and while you did get compensated well, I kind of needed my downtime. I wanted my time to do my own creative explorations and do things that were enjoyable to me. So I started to get an idea in my head that I wanted to change my career path, and in a way that's not traditional in the United States. I mean, usually you're going up and to the right. You're getting bigger jobs, more responsibility, higher roles.
Hmm.
And I was kind of starting to think like, maybe this isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe I want something else. So, and that's so fast forward from that a little bit. I did a few after I left the insurance company. I tried a director's role at one company. I did sort of another sort of visionary planning role where I wasn't necessarily a senior leader, but I was doing the planning and managing the UX for another company.
Hmm.
And then I decided to leave that company. I did start another consultancy just to myself as the consultant, and I started hung up my own shingle and started to pursue work. And that's interesting enough how I ended up at Amazon.
Really? Are you talking about Onvia?
Onvia was the company that I was, I think, was a great title, like Director of User Research and
Hmm.
Customer Success or something like that. But
Hmm. So Kind Spark was your second consultancy?
Kind Spark was my second consultancy. Yeah,
Hmm.
to me, the Kind Spark is creativity, so that's was my little.
Okay. And by the last common career progression in the States, you mean that you switched back from the management to the individual contributor?
I switched back to an IC, but I also dropped many levels. Right,
Hmm.
I went from being director level, actually VP level, director level now, and back down to an IC with a title of senior designer.
It's almost like you downshifted your your career.
Yeah,
Yeah, not very common for the States for sure.
right. Not very common, but I think it does go into, I think, understanding what makes you happy. So I
Hmm.
understand what makes me happy. I downshifted, but I downshifted with the cooperation of the people I worked for. And so I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I don't really want to go higher. I will give you director level help. I can advise, I can guide. I've got a lot of experience. Um, I'm not afraid to be in a meeting and talk up, and I will talk to directors. I will talk to VPs as with respect, but as peers, and just sort of work through problems for you. But I want to stay down here, and so it wasn't truly like I just jumped off and completely downshifted. I get to touch those things, but the main thing is I don't. This is going to sound funny, but the main thing is I don't own them on weekends.
Wow.
I can go home and relax on the weekend. I can travel on weekends. I can make my art on weekends because I like to make art.
Okay, so I wanna dive a bit deeper on that one, but in a moment.
Okay.
So what happened with your second agency though? So because the first one was
Yeah.
acquired, so this was kind of almost like the end of that agency, right?
Yeah.
And then you went back to this entrepreneurial part of you,
Yep.
of that of your path, and but now you don't have that agency anymore, do you?
No, I don't.
Why is
And
that?
why? Um, when I left Onvia, my intention was to not work for another company again. My intention was to do consulting for the rest of my career.
Hmm.
Um, Part of that was also what I learned about myself is what I would say is I have a short attention span. I'm not the person who you want to steward your project. I'm the person who, if you have a big, crazy, flaming disaster, you want somebody to jump in and come up with interesting ideas and solve it. I'll do that. I like that. But I want, as soon as it's not flaming anymore, I want to hand that to someone else and go to the next next major project or problem. Um, and so that's what I did. I leapt. I started the Kind Spark. When I was doing work for Amazon, I was doing work for a couple other companies at the same time too. The one thing I noticed about Amazon is that the problems that I was being presented with were really interesting and unheard of and different, and the company itself moved fairly quickly through them. So I was doing what I wanted as a consultant, doing what I wanted, was hoping for as a consultant, but as an employee. And I was in the middle of a couple of very interesting new things. And one of the leaders there had said, "Well, would you ever consider, just joining us? I mean, you've contracted here for 3 years. Would you just think about joining us?" And my thought was, I'd work for you. I like you. I like
Mm.
the way you approach things, and that brought me back in. And I don't think I had any belief at the time that I would be here for 10 years.
Hmm.
Uh, but that's what has happened. But mostly because, like to me, working at Amazon is a lot like almost going to college. You get to work at a job for a period of time, learn a special set of skills, solve interesting problems, but then you're encouraged to find another problem to take
Hmm.
on. And so you get to keep changing your focus. You get to keep learning, which I think is really important for me. Um, so it keeps my interest.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So it's from my opinion, from my point of view, this benefit of having such a huge variety of different projects, different teams, different departments, different even like business models and lines of business within Amazon. It's almost like there's just marketing brand Amazon, but there are like dozens and dozens of different companies, like almost like independent quite often, right? That it's easy and it's also quite supported to move around and transfer to different teams that you maybe find more effective in going to the next step of your career or kind of in that new technology or
Right.
yeah, so it's kind of it's very, I think it's Amazon has a unique combination of opportunities here for internal transfers, for internal movement, so which is like I'm actually pretty happy to have this benefit. um yeah, yeah, okay, let's go back to what you mentioned about why you decided for yourself that you didn't want to be in the senior management leadership kind of position for that, I guess, protecting your personal time and
Mhm.
weekend time and off work time, right? So because you also moved from almost like one work culture in America, in the States, in the United States of America, and you are now in Europe, which is, some people can argue that it could be almost like the opposite side of the work-life balance kind of culture, workaholic details, right? So maybe you could share like what's their observation? Like, is this stereotype true that America is a really like a workaholic culture, and Europe is more mindful, at least, of the personal time and other priorities outside the work? So I'm curious to hear what was your personal experience here.
I think it's another really good question. I'd like to go back a little bit before that transition, and part of what brought my interest in finding balance to my life is the fact that I had two sons, and they were young, and I actually, this is an interesting observation, is that one of those companies I'd been laid off from, and uh, I was not working. I had my severance, but and other things to use for about 6 months. But I got to coach my son's baseball team. I got to attend a bunch of parent-child things, and I realized that that was such a wonderful time. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it was like some of the most valuable time I had in my life. And so I think there was something in my head around, you know what, this isn't a bad idea. If finding a way to sort of find a balance between what I'm doing to keep the lights on, to pay the rent, and to put money away, if it's actually eating up my entire life, what's the point? Where am I going? Um, to the one part of your question, is America a workaholic culture? I don't know if workaholic is the right term. I do think that American business, American jobs in general, if you try and average across uh, the entire country, you'll see that in general it's a competitive culture. We kind of speak to competition, whether you want to compete or not. Life is a competition. You know, we're competing for uh, roles, promotions. We're competing for higher salaries. We're competing for a bigger house, a nicer car. Now, there are many levels to this competition. There are many places you work where the competition is very soft and very slow, and they don't encourage that. They encourage much more of a work-life balance. Um,
Like government kind of agencies?
well, even regions are different. I mean, I felt like when I moved from Chicago to Seattle,
Mm.
uh, I mean, I probably dropped 5 or 6 hours of like weekly time expected to be at work. You know, the kind of the burden. I remember in Seattle saying to myself, "It's interesting. Work-life balance seems to be like a real thing here. Like people care about it." And not that they don't care about it in Chicago. Chicago is a great place to work and a great place to live, but it is definitely it's a place that attracts a lot of people, a lot of big businesses, and a lot of competitive people. And so you're sort of you're in a competing environment.
Mhm.
Now I moved from Seattle to Luxembourg to Europe, and that again, I probably lost about 5 hours of expected work time when I made that move over here, for the same role, for the same level of work. And I do think the priorities in Europe line up better with my priorities, the things I care about. Uh, and so I'm glad I can contribute and add value and have very interesting design projects. But I really do value the fact that I get more time off, so I can enjoy living in Europe. I can travel a bit. I enjoy the benefits. I enjoy probably the biggest thing is I enjoy not being worried about things like healthcare. It's like
Mm.
it's innate in how it's structured, so it's just not a worry to have. And so my experience of Europe is much more pleasant and aligned with my priorities.
Yeah, yeah. I think if we go outside even just kind of the work culture and all the differences between living and working in Europe versus United States, like healthcare in particular, it's a huge topic in itself. Definitely, yeah, a huge benefit of living in Europe. Um, but just a few days ago, I saw, like, on that topic, I saw a hilarious tweet. I read a hilarious tweet, and actually I found it, and so I'm going to read it out. So it's by Chris Bach, and it's obviously a joke, I assume, but it's kind of, I think it's a good illustration of the differences, and it may sound like a generalization and stereotype, but it's hilarious, still hilarious, like huge number of likes and everything. So here it is: scheduling a meeting in America. I'm having a brain surgery tomorrow from 2 to 5 p.m., but can do 5:15 p.m. tomorrow if that works. Your European, I guess, version.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is the 789th anniversary of the local cheesemaker setting up shop in our town, which is a 3-day holiday, but I can do it next week.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I laughed so hard.
It's just a
It's
little,
a great.
but it is a little. I mean, it is kind of funny. Actually, when I first got here, I was on a trip to Madrid for work, and I'd stuck around for the weekend. There's this really cool market that fills this street, and I was walking along, and it's a cobblestone street, and I tripped, and I was wearing shorts. I had a cobblestone street and scraped my knee, so I got a little road rash on my knee and it's bleeding. But right now there's a policeman running up to me. There are people running around me like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And all speaking to me in Spanish. I speak a little bit of Spanish. It took me a little while to get what's going on, but then a woman came out from the store, brought me a cup of water, and, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm okay. I just want to go. I can see that there's a pharmacy over there. I'm gonna go get a band-aid." And she said, They know you're American. They're telling you that the ambulance doesn't cost anything because they're worried you're not going to get health care because you're worried about the expense." I was like, okay, that's a pretty poignant example of, like, no, you're in America. It's okay. We'll take care of you. And so, yeah, I mean, that's it. I posted something the other day because I took a spill at a Airbnb in September, and it was in another country, in Belgium. And I went to the ER, was X-rayed, saw two doctors, all good, left. The bill for me for the ER visit, and it was very fast, super efficient, X-rays and everything, was $29, essentially $29. But the actual cost before the local insurance was only $129. So, I mean, that speaks to something too. Is like, nothing
Yeah.
costs $129 healthcare in the US. So I know this is a UX discussion, not healthcare. So sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's an interesting still point to the differences that also can actually contribute to the competitiveness in the States,
Yeah.
just because there is more pressure and more stress from, I guess, not losing your job, because otherwise you can go bankrupt from all the additional expenses like healthcare, which is like
Yeah.
everybody has to deal with this. So I think it's definitely an interesting, I guess, selling point for moving to Europe like we did.
It's another aspect of quality of life, is what I would say. Is like,
Yeah,
everything you do has a trade-off, and
yeah.
so, what do you value? And for me, that peace of mind is important. So,
Agree, and I'm sure for many people. Okay, so let's go back to the UX
okay,
topic.
the original topic.
So and going back to your story and your kind of career progression, so obviously we don't have enough time to go through every single role and like all the projects and all the things that you accomplished, because it's just like endless list. But I'll include the link to your LinkedIn profile in the notes, and people can check it out. One last question I have on your journey is related to your current role, and you have an additional role to your, I guess, day-to-day job at Amazon, which is CXBR. Can you maybe just a quick summary of like what this means and why you're doing this, and really kind of
Yeah.
how this can help, how this role contribute to Amazon's success? Maybe let's go from that angle.
Okay. So CXBR stands for Customer Experience Bar Raiser. There are about 50, 60 of us around, and at one point in Amazon's history, Jeff Bezos used to review every bit of the customer experience, but as it scaled, that couldn't scale, right? And so after a few years of trying other things, this CXBR program was brought up. And what I do is I help people with we have the working backwards from the customer approach. I help people with that. I coach, I mentor, I teach the process. Um, and then I do these reviews, and reviews are reviewing the documents and the plans of different project teams to ensure they have considered the customer. If we work from the customer backwards, my job is to be a strong customer advocate in the project process. What is important is I am the people in my role. We're fresh eyes. We cannot review projects that directly fall into our leadership chain, that are things that we would be able to influence. And so we are meant to be unbiased reviewers. Our only bias is towards what does the customer need or want. And so what that does is you will have heard this a few times from me. There's no business out there that doesn't say they love their customer. Everybody loves their customer. Uh, the problem is, and at least in my experience, has been that while they say they love their customer, they might in back rooms discuss how they can manipulate the customer, how they could cajole the customer, how they could trick the customer. And at least for me, when I think of somebody who's supposed to be my friend, somebody who I advocate for, that's not how I would treat them. I'm going to treat them with respect. I'm going to treat them with trust. I'm going to get them involved. I'm going to speak to them like they're intelligent. And so this customer backwards process allows us to look at all the business desires, the business objectives, the plans that are coming up, and ensure that when we're doing it, it's got the best intentions for the customer, that the customer's needs are considered upfront. Um, and what that tends to do is it allows us to change strategies, to look at things a little bit differently, and make sure that we do things that are right for them. And that's why I like doing it. It's kind of a volunteer extra effort. I do it outside of my regular daily role. Um, but it feeling like you can influence the tide. Basically, you can start to help ensure that um, it can stay day one. That we're thinking of good ideas, and the good ideas that benefit customers. It's a pretty it's a pretty good feeling.
So in a nutshell, this mysterious acronym CXBR means user needs evangelist of sorts.
Yeah. A small thing I would clarify, which will also maybe slightly annoy, is I really make it a point to try to not use the terms of any of our domains, any of our industries. Like I try not to talk about user needs. I try to talk about what does the customer need, and I try to give the customer as real of a persona as possible so that I can really feel the customer. I guess I find that a lot of business language tends to almost numb the sense of the feelings of the customer.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it very blurry, very unclear, very insensitive, and the goal is empathy. If you can truly empathize with a customer, you can typically find what matters to them, and if you find what matters to them, then you can make something good for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So I think it's we're a customer advocate, um, and yeah. I mean, I think that's it. Is just keeping that voice of their needs into the equation.
Mm-hmm. On that note, is it possible to teach somebody empathy?
Great question. Um, I mean, I guess we're all kind of familiar that there are people called like sociopaths and psychopaths. Assuming we can't necessarily teach them, um, I do find that uh, we get a lot of nods when you talk about empathy, but when it comes down to actually identifying feelings, it is a lot trickier than 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 other certain skills you can learn. But I do think it's amazing how often you can still teach people enough to pay attention to like feeling cues and needs, underlying needs. What's the need being expressed? Um, but I do think it's putting it bluntly, I think a lot of us aren't very don't have access to our own feelings very well, and so being able to access someone else's can be quite tricky. So I do think it there's some people that's just innately good at it, but I do think it's a skill that if you want to get good at it, it takes a little bit of investment of time and practice to be able to pick those things up.
Mm-hmm. From my observations and maybe actually my personal almost like analysis of my journey in acquiring more empathy as a skill. Is it a skill?
Mhm.
Um, I think for me it was like one of like at least from what I can recall right now, one of the eye-opening experiences was observing usability testing of some products by folks who needed some assistive technology. And this was such an interest, like it was almost like completely different angle, like opened completely different window into this world of UX, right? At least for me. And I actually remember, maybe actually it was within Amazon, like one of the first months when I joined Amazon, there was like one of the conferences in Seattle, and they had almost like a trade show kind of like a hall with
Yeah,
different like innovations and like different products. And one of the booths was related to assistive technology and how one would uh, listen to like a screen reader, or how would one would almost like you can attach like a band with a wand, and then you can like if you don't have hands, for example, if you cannot move hands to navigate like a website or product, how would you do it with your head? Oh,
right.
it was amazing. Like I still kind of clearly remember all those holy cow moments. Definitely like one of my recommendations for folks to really at least, yeah, because for me it was quite alien. Like I wasn't aware of how people like with disabilities would use something like this. It was almost like like yes, screen reader, yes, it's important, or like keyboard navigation, yes. But like until I tried it myself, this was definitely a changing moment for me.
Well, I think that's it's to me it's eye opening when we start to realize how this machine we live in works, and how perception works, how our brain. So I do a lot of reading around human behavior, um, and psychology and anthropology, and just because I think the more that we understand how these different motivations, reactions, responses needs get expressed in by us, the better you can be at UX. And so, uh, yeah, oh, you're describing that experience. I when I was in India, I ate at a place called Dialogue in the Dark, where you're served by blind servers, but you're in a room that is absolutely dark. There is no light at all,
Hmm.
and so you are blind, effectively blind, and you're in a room with multiple tables that are being served food, and so you can hear all the noise of a restaurant, but you have no access to where things are other than the sound of your plate being set down, the server making a point of picking up your fork and setting it down so you can find it on the
Hmm.
table, and where voices are coming from or where people are. And it I've described it to people as I could almost feel my eyes being hungry, like they couldn't find anything to see, and it was like my eyes just
Yeah.
kept trying to open wider, like you're going
Yeah.
to see something, but there was nothing to see. And it was amazing where things like I couldn't tell, like I knew generally what was going to be coming for food, but I wasn't certain if I was eating rice or the kind of the goat dish that was coming with it. So it was that, once again, it's sort of humbling when you start to
Yeah.
realize how even a fully enabled person has their blind spots. So imagine somebody who's got to overcome some uh, disability, and it it becomes quite poignant. So I think that's a great example. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and so it sounds like an amazing place. I've heard of a similar restaurant in Vancouver, I think, when it's like also kind of completely dark, and you kind of you your body elevates or amplifies the feelings, even like the enjoyment from the food, just because there's like sensory deprivation. It's like this kind of the floating tanks idea,
Yeah,
but like from your eyes. So kind of, and I think in the floating tanks it's also completely dark, so it's the same idea. I completely, yeah, I think it's an amazing idea, because we're just so used to all this almost like highways that's going to feed all the different sources of information through eyes, through ears, like all the senses, right, into our brain. So like this almost like detox for a few minutes or hours is, yeah, I think it sounds like a very healthy approach to recalibrate your senses, and your enjoyment from even like everyday activities and food in this case,
yeah,
but also building empathy and really kind of imagine how would you live the whole life like without vision. It's hard to comprehend, right, frankly. But I think it's great for empathy for sure. It's almost like I was when I was thinking like how, like, because this question, like how can you teach empathy, it's quite, I guess it's not a new question. So I've
right,
heard this from many folks, and I was like thinking about like really how would you really like trying to also apply my own experience, how I almost like upskilled my empathy, at least how I think it, by experience it firsthand.
right.
If there was like could be potentially like if there is like a course or like a program teaching accessibility for design, right, or something like this, as a part of that there could be like almost like a field trip to like a restaurant like this, or maybe there's like a lab set up, that you can really experience it yourself, because it's the best way than just reading articles or newsletters online, trying to build this empathy muscle. I think it's, yeah, yeah, restaurant sounds like I should add it to my bucket list.
Well, and I mean, also say we're bringing up some fairly profound examples of something to try to sense. But I do find I regularly attend customer connection sessions where when you listen to a customer talk about a problem they're having, particularly if
Oh yeah,
it's a piece of software that you've worked on,
yeah,
it tends to paint a very poignant picture of why something matters, or it puts emotion to an error message or a percentage of failures. When you hear, when it's one thing to know that somebody couldn't do something, but it's nothing to know that it was little Johnny's birthday and the present arrived late.
yeah, yeah,
That was like, oh, okay.
yeah,
That would really be bad if that happened to me, to my son, or So yeah, let's try to feel that. So
yeah,
yeah, I don't know, but I really do like the idea of I'm a bit of a I, I read probably a book a month, just usually at least one book a month on human behavior, on
Hmm.
just understanding this thing, this meat sickle we walk around in,
Yeah,
and uh, I just find it really interesting to find, what we don't see, why we don't see things, why we don't
yeah.
understand things, why we misperceive things, and yeah, to me it helps me a lot with empathy. When somebody asks me why a problem is happening, I can go, I think I might know. What do you think about this? And we can walk through an idea of what the behavior might be and connect with, okay, and that's why they're missing it, and that's why it feels bad, and so.
What's your favorite book, or at least kind of you would say like the most uh, valuable book on human behavior
Who?
for somebody who wants to learn more?
I mean, if you the a good foundational book is Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, by Kahneman. Um, it's a very dense book. It's a lot to read,
Hmm.
but it does help you understand that most of the time, uh, when we are thinking fast, which is most of our day, what why we don't see things, why things don't draw our attention. There's lots of conversations around cognitive load and the burdens on people,
Hmm.
but realizing that cognitive load isn't bad if what you're trying to do is draw someone's attention to something. And so when you start thinking about this in a much more of a, instead of good and bad, more like, well, what's the intention? What am I trying to help them do? Um, I think that's a good one. Another one which I've loved and hopefully is still in print is called The Science of Fear. I find that fear drives a lot of our decisions, and so understanding more about how our brains interpret, all the different things that contribute to how we assess fear and risk, does tend to help me understand people.
Hmm. Yeah. I'll include this in the show notes as well. And I think I have this Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow book, but just the size of it and like the number of pages kind of, I never really got to reading this. I'll have
Well,
to find it.
I'll let you know when you go to read it. It's not only the size of it; it's the fact that it's written almost like a textbook.
Mm.
So not only is it big, I found that I would read a page and then I'd set it down. I'd pick it up and read the page again, and
Sip of
you
wine.
you got to kind
What did I
of
just read?
digest it. Yeah. In fact, I read it. I think it took me like 2 years to read it because you couldn't
Mm.
just read right through it,
Got it. Okay.
unless you were taking a class on it or
Okay.
something where you had to. It's very dense. It's full of great information, but it's very dense.
Okay. Even fewer points for prioritization then. Okay. Um, Actually, one more question on your Amazon experience.
Sure.
Obviously, as much as you can share. What's a really, I would say, if somebody wants to join Amazon as a designer, as a UX designer, what you think they should keep in mind from the point of view of like what, I guess, struggles or what kind of challenges that you have to deal with on a daily basis or quite regularly as a designer?
The way I look at UX design is that we are problem solvers. We're not just designers. Like we need to understand the business. We need to understand the limitations and the possibilities of the technology. We need to understand the customer at a very deep, intimate level so we can better design things. Uh, I think at Amazon, you you have to be able to flex muscles beyond what you might call traditional UX design, meaning you are going to have to talk to product managers about things. Um, you will succeed better if you can collaborate very closely with your engineering teams and help educate them about processes and get educated about their processes. So it's maybe a less pure version of user experience here. So you got to be a little flexible. I think there are teams that are bigger design orgs where you can have a purer experience. I, in general, like being able to flex those muscles and move into different things. So I tend to focus on smaller teams where if I have 2 or 3 people on my team, or maybe 10 people on my team, um, I'm going to be called on to kind of flex beyond just the pure design role.
Okay. Good insight. Mm.
And tell me if you
Yeah,
think
I'm
I'm
just kind of thinking that
homogenizing it too much, or
no,
I
I think the question was kind of not great because just kind of almost like analyzing what I know about being a designer at Amazon is that every team is different.
yeah
It's almost like some because I just remember that like when people ask me this question like about working as a UX designer at Amazon, I was like, it's so different. It really depends on the team because we have a bunch of one-person teams. We have a bunch of like more mature big teams with specialized roles. So
yeah
and the dynamics and the process and even like the pace could be very different depending on like all the location, the even like within the states there could be like different like mini cultures and
yeah
mini practices, right? So it's really, I don't think you can really answer that question like
yeah.
in a
Well, I think
generalized
that
way.
what you just you just gave a very good answer. I think I mean I think in every company there is a reality that you need to look at who your manager is, who your boss is, what your organization is, and what the culture of that organization is, because it can be different from the core organization of the enterprise.
Very different.
I think at Amazon, what you said early on in the interview, Amazon is like hundreds of companies. So not only do you have Amazon culture, you
Hmm.
have that particular company's culture, mental model. Um, that leader may have been raised at Amazon or may have come from another company, so they might bring some of that company's culture
Yeah.
into that leadership role. Um, and then where does design fit into the ultimate uh, set of priorities for that organization? And so, yeah, I think there's an incredible variability
Hmm.
of what it means to be a UX designer at Amazon, and we have lots of these places where you're one designer that's a UX department, and so you're a designer, you're a researcher, you're also fronting your work to presenting your work to leadership, and you're doing all of it. There are places that are large scale teams that have lots of specialization and lots of division of labor that service a bunch of organizations themselves. And then there are these places in between, which is kind of where I exist now, which is it's a small team. So you get a little bit of the Swiss Army knife UX designer and a little bit of the specialization. So you get to be a little closer to being a dedicated UX designer. But
Yeah.
yeah, and that's just like the three major flavors. But then within each org, it tends to get prioritized very differently.
Yeah, it's very variability is extremely high. Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's yeah, and every I guess setup overall has its own pros and cons, as you mentioned. Like some people like to be journalists, right? Some people like to be more and specialize on like a particular part of the design process. Or
yeah,
yeah, it's very interesting. Okay, let's talk a bit more about I guess more tactical stuff.
sure,
And speaking about resumes, portfolios, like overall, because after 10 years of, you're almost at 10 years, right? At
yeah,
Amazon. So I'm
uh,
sure that you've been a part of many interviews of designers who were applying to a job at Amazon,
yeah.
for a job, to a job. And I'm sure you have a great insight into what Amazon is looking for in a candidate, and like for example, like yeah, exactly, what kind of portfolio case studies work best or something like this. So like obviously as much as you can share, and almost like going back to the previous question, that it's really hard to get like a standardized answer to like what UX designer is at Amazon.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen so far, and obviously I don't have as much experience interviewing at Amazon as you do, but from what I've seen so far, across all different teams, regardless of which team you're applying to, which location, which role within the UX designers team family, there isn't at least an attempt to keep expectations calibrated at the same level and
Right.
the bar kind of at the same level, right? So it should be at least transferable. So it shouldn't be like that, like one team is looking for this kind of really unique designer, another team is looking for a completely different designer. So there still should be some, I guess, universal expectations.
Right.
And what a person who wants to apply to Amazon should keep in mind when they apply.
One of the things in looking at UX designer resumes is the focus on results, focus on outcomes. And what did you do, and what was the result that took place? I think it's beneficial for all resumes to
Mm-hmm.
be more results focused, and not just listing a bunch of adjectives, but actually talking about putting a number to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really helps. I also think it's not the way that we often talk about it, and so I think that can be a bit of a challenge sometimes for UX designers. I would also stress, this is very much for Amazon, but once again, I think it's probably good wherever you go, is as you write your accomplishments, don't just write the things you're proud of. Think about, this is, you got to work backwards from that person who's hiring you. Bring focus to the work that you've done that's relevant to that job. So I see people that say, like, I never change my resume. I'm like, every time I go in for an interview, I would always have the resume reflecting the role that I'm pursuing, because many of us have careers that have many experiences in them, and some of them will be relevant and some of them won't. And so
Mm-hmm.
relevancy and the numbers matter. Um, I do think of making sure that you demonstrate the breadth of the work you've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, don't think that just the portfolio is going to get you the job. Uh, I have, I do have people come in and interview, and they're like, okay, here, look at my great portfolio. I'm like, well, it's nice work, but what I don't have is any context on what you've been doing, how you worked with your teammates, what contribution did you have. Um, Resumes that say we a lot, to me, I find uh,
Mm-hmm.
some we's are okay, but it's great to know who we is. Like, on a team of 3 people, I did X, versus on a team of 300 people, I did X.
Mm-hmm.
That's material that matters. And so, trying to be this, what I would call, precise in how you're describing your experience, uh, helps the person considering your resume better tailor questions to you and understand more appropriately the types of contributions you've been making.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say is from a resume perspective.
How about
Uh,
portfolio, case studies? What stands out? Or
yeah.
what really works well? What Amazon is looking for?
Well, uh, it's interesting as you're asking me what is Amazon looking for, but a lot of it comes back to what do I think people looking for UX designers are looking for. So I will put it in the lens that I currently have. But I would say that the main thing about these uh, case studies that you're going to walk people through is, one, make them relevant. So if you have something that's more relevant to the job you're looking for, please bring that to the surface. Two, realize you're telling stories. So, and you're also demonstrating your ability to organize information, demonstrate information hierarchy, take people through a process. And so make sure that your portfolio reflects the best of what you do. So I I have seen portfolios that the underlying project was good, but the portfolio itself required me to interview the person to help me understand what they did, why they did it, how it worked, which caused me to question their abilities, because, like, okay, well, you're telling your story, and this is probably the most important story you're going to tell. So
Mm-hmm.
why can't you make this narrative, this story work? Um, yeah, I mean, I think those are the main things. I also think it's really important to be honest. don't be afraid. The portfolio won't have it, but when you're talking about it, don't be afraid to talk about the mistakes you made. We all make mistakes. And if there's something that also causes me a little bit of anxiety is when a person can't seem to bring up a real shortcoming, a real mistake, a real challenge, a real obstacle that they had to deal with. Because very few projects are just smooth sailing all the way through. There's almost always some challenge, some obstacle. We do make mistakes. We make great predictions, hypothesis up front, and the end result is very different. And so personally, I find, and I think it's most, I think leaders find, is that if you don't bring up those mistakes, I start to wonder whether you think you ever made a mistake. Can you learn? Uh, talking about a mistake and talking about what you did differently the next time, that's a very powerful message. It talks about learning and growth and development, and that you're open to the opportunity to acknowledge that you still have things to learn.
Interesting. Yeah, I think even though I was asking about like Amazon's expectation, or at least lens, right? I don't think it actually this would not work with another company that's at least kind of somewhat understands what UX designer should be doing and what UX designer can bring
Yeah.
to the table. Because I'm just kind of trying to think if this advice can be applied to non-Amazon applications. I think it's still very relevant, and it's more like on the almost like principles level and not a particular job position level or company level.
But what you just said, I think, is something that's actually maybe important for those interviewing at Amazon is do your homework on Amazon. I mean, we have a hiring website that has great information about our leadership principles. And if you can translate your work into leadership principles, it will help us understand what you do. So that's another thing to think about. I mean, once again, I would say wherever you interview, if you don't at minimally go and read
Yeah,
the about page for the company, that's a big mistake. Um, but I mean, at Amazon, we provide you with the kind of the framework
yeah.
to talk to us about your work, and I do think it's good. And I will stress, it's not unusual. I've had more than a few people come to interviews where am fairly sure they just handed me the resume they always have. They haven't done anything with their portfolio, and I start asking them to go through their portfolio, and like they stumbling through it, and they clearly haven't prepared, and um, realize that the people that are coming to us generally are really well prepared, and so we it can be in stark contrast if you're trying to wing it
Mhm.
versus you've thought it through, you're ready, you did your homework, and you're here to make the most of our time.
Yeah, it feels to me, and yeah, I've witnessed this kind of interviews myself. Yes, I don't think I've ever tried to win an interview, because the ones that I would apply, or at least would invest my energy into applying and really kind of going through all this, sometimes too many conversations prior to the interview, it's already kind of means it's almost like pre-qualified this employer and this position, uh, to that it's worthy at least my effort, and I would kind of do my best, to at least to prepare, right, and like do the research. So it's kind of the bare minimum. So if you're trying to win it, like, what's even the point? But yeah, I
But
think like, yeah,
go ahead.
go on.
I was just going to say, I think it does come down to it. You're asking for my undivided attention for 45 minutes or an hour
Hmm.
to talk to you.
Yeah, it's like,
And if you haven't invested any time before that, I mean, I've read your resume, I've probably checked out your website, I've done all this stuff before this. And if you come in and you're kind of like, huh, great question, I haven't really thought about any of those things. It's kind of like, okay, I mean, I have, honestly, with some of these things, it's like, well, really, what I want to do is mentor the person after the interview and say, listen, don't put anyone else through this because you're just wasting time.
yeah, it's like, yeah. After this interview, you should say, if you were to ask me how likely I would recommend this interview to my other colleagues on the 10-point scale, this would get 0.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, good point. But it's almost like it goes back to this kind of ethics question, and
yeah,
it's almost like the bare minimum that you should be doing when you're interacting with another human, regardless if it's interview or something else. It's really kind of, I think, have the decency to respect their time, right? And by going into an interview without preparation and just kind of disrespecting time, I think, and people's attention.
What I think something to remember is that the company, the person interviewing you, and the interviewee, the candidate, have the same goal. The candidate wants a job that they're going to like, that they're going to thrive in, they're going to succeed at.
Mm-hmm.
The company wants to hire someone who likes the job, who is going to be passionate and going to invest their time, and they can succeed at it. And so, good relationships come from this idea of somewhat of a balance, that you want to be
Mutual
investing as
respect.
much time, mutual respect.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
you need to walk into this conversation realizing that this is, you know frankly, I have personally been in interviews at companies, I mean, interviewing for a role, where mid-interview I'm going, the more we're talking, the more I'm realizing I don't think I want this role. And I've
Mm.
said that to them. They're like, really? I'm like, well, let me talk about what I'm talking about. Like, thank
Because
you.
you're a
And
jerk.
yeah, yeah, I didn't say that. No, no, but actually turned out that I'm not kidding. The one center I'm talking about, I got a referral
Mm-hmm.
for another role that I did want,
Mm.
because the guy felt like, yeah, you're acting like a grown up. You were prepared.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're talking to me like I'm an adult, and we're at the table together. And so, that kind of respect gets respect.
It's like swipe left. Give me next one.
There you go.
Good point. Okay, so let's actually zoom out a bit, and because we touched a bit on, like, I think on this topic when we were talking about assistive technologies, and um, it kind of like reminded me of the Neuralink project that Musk is driving, and it kind of like led me to thinking about more the future of the technology of, like, especially with all the kind of chat GPT, like AI, other, like every day there is like dozens new, it feels like there is dozens new projects in different areas of application.
Right.
Some kind of generate images, some generate voice, some, I already saw some kind of, you put the text and like the website generates video with like a photo like looking video image of a narrator who are obviously not you, but it's almost like faking the videos like that. And it's just, yeah, it's very interesting times, I think, we live in. So I'm curious to, maybe let's talk a bit more about the future of the technology, the AI and non-AI, and how it will, you think it will impact and change our job as designers, if it will.
Okay. I think when thinking about what the new technologies are going to do to this career, to my career, um, I got to think back across my career. And the one thing that I think has been uh, consistent across my very inconsistent and jagged path is learning, is always adapting and finding ways to apply the things I've learned. Um, when I came out of school, design was on a drafting table with an X-Acto knife and a ruler. Um, then it became something that could be done on a computer, but very rudimentary designs on a computer, uh, and ongoing and ongoing. I mean, I worked on a Apple IIe, I worked on a Macintosh, and I worked on Adobe Illustrator 1, and now I'm doing prototypes in Figma or Framer or Acture, and working on a very fast laptop with 1,000 times more processing power than the laptop I had 5 years ago. So the the one inevitable thing about uh, life is change, and particularly a career in technology. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
getting nearer to technology, there's a lot to continue to learn and adapt. I will say the one thing that I have always done is when something new comes up, I kind of ask what's in it for me. How do I do this? How do I make something with it? What could I? How could it help me? How could it carry me forward? Um, there's another interesting book which I do believe is out of print. It's called The Box, but it's about
Mm.
when television came out.
Oh,
It's about
different box.
a different box, but it talks about the evolving from essentially movies and to television. And there were all kinds of predictions that the movie industry will be gone. Right, just gonna be gone. Because the movie industry at the time was primarily serialized entertainment, which
Hmm.
is what TV is really good at delivering. Uh, so I find that when new technologies come along, like the television, what it does, it tends to reframe the previous technology. You tend to think of it differently.
Hmm.
Um, and so what I think you want to be is you want to be reframing the way we work in light of the new tools that are showing up. So an example of that can be, if we're working through ideas and you have two or three approaches to something, is there a way that the one of the AI tools can help you quickly explore those approaches? Can you accelerate the process in looking at variations? And I call it getting past the no's, like no, no, no. Oh, that's kind of okay, that's something that I think that to me, I'm finding AI is pretty good at it in terms of it can take instructions and it can do variations within a theme.
Hmm.
Um, and I think how right now, as you say, at the moment, where every day there's something new coming out around, particularly around AI. Um, I do feel like those tools right now are coming out as more. They're almost like novelty. They're interesting. I
Yeah.
could use them in one way. They each do kind of do something in a certain way, but they haven't been fully integrated into something else that would make it into just a daily tool, right?
Hmm.
Something that I might want to work with. And so I think playing with these technologies a little bit to understand how it could help you and working across them and finding things that you like. That's not going to guarantee that what you're doing is the way the future is going to be, but that experience becomes something you can translate into what does get defined, right?
Hmm.
And so that's been my experience. A number of times where I felt, oh my gosh, I spent all this time learning this and becoming really good at this, only to find that this was acquired by another company and is being put out of business.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I'd go for a job where they're asking for this skill set, and I'd say I haven't done this, but I have this experience, and I believe I can apply. This is how I think it's relevant.
Hmm.
And so, long way of getting there. But my answer is, I think stay on top of it, be open to it, have conversations about it, read what people are writing about it, join meetings where it's being discussed amongst peers, and don't be afraid to invent something with it. I mean, I think that's the other thing is sometimes we fear these things, but part of the reason these things are being put out this way is they're not certain how it's going to be used, and they're giving people platforms to play and discover. So maybe it's your idea that becomes the next billion-dollar idea. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting, very, I guess, more productive framing of the question. And I like the metaphor with um, what you mentioned, like that you went through multiple of those new technologies and that you had to learn, and like thinking about how this can, I forgot the term that you used, reframe the toolkit, the tool set, something like this.
I think yeah, it's reframing was one of the things I did, or redefine too.
Yeah, redefine. Yeah, it's an interesting mindset that I think is very scalable actually, like because it doesn't matter what next technology comes out. If you approach every change um, from this angle, it's almost like you're future proofing your, I don't know, work philosophy of sorts, like
Yeah,
and profession, regardless of where you are. But yeah, I think like a really interesting point that you mentioned, and I kind of keep thinking this regularly, that our profession as as a general field, just because we're so closely tied to the technology that has been accelerating like crazy, right? Like even before AI,
yeah,
it's almost like it's a requirement to be able to learn new stuff and new technologies, and because I guess even now it feels to me that the pace of change is increasing. So it's
yeah,
almost like it's not slowing down. So unless you are ready to be constantly keeping up with all these new things that show up, and there will be more and more and faster, and you'll have to learn how to use them and how to apply them to a job and how to potentially switch from one tool to another, as you said. Like, and I went through this a couple times at least for sure, when another company acquires, and like it's almost like usually gets worse. So you have to, well, like you learn Sketch, right, and then another cool guy on the block shows up, and now you have to learn Figma. And now like it's almost like probably there's something else coming.
And Figma
Um,
gets bought by Adobe, and you're wondering where that's going to go.
exactly. Unless the what's FCC or whatever this agency is called, it
FTC, yeah, Federal Trade Commission.
blocks the acquisition, which I've heard an interesting development. I thought it was already kind of set in stone, but apparently
Yeah.
not really.
Well, I also do think so. Here's another maybe for those of us who have been around for a little while, don't underestimate the value of what you've already learned.
Mm-hmm.
I do find that is also something where I was often surprised, where a technique I learned in a less modern a version of the software I'm working in is something that the person today doesn't know. They don't get trained, and they're like, "How'd you do that? What are you doing?" And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, yeah." And so I do find that as long as you keep learning the new stuff and you bring the old stuff with you, don't underestimate the value of all these tricks, all these approaches,
Yeah, that's
processes,
true.
things, because they're still appropriate. I also think innately being we're creative. We're supposed to be creative. I think making sure that you don't get to the point where you're simply executing. Make sure
Mm-hmm.
you're always inventing something. You're always being you're having to make something new. Um, I think that's also one of the ways that I think we keep we stay viable, we stay relevant. Is that you remember that creativity is you know these AI models can be trained, but they're trained with someone's work,
Mm-hmm.
and so you still coming up with a brand new idea is something that's this thing between our ears is pretty good at.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a great point and almost a perfect segue to a question that I had for you as well.
Okay.
So let me phrase it. So you mentioned that you've been around
Yeah, just a little while.
and you've learned a lot, right? And I completely agree. So with every next experience, every next job, every next project, every next even team partner, like project partner you work with, so you can learn something new, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody does, but at least you should try. So, and it's kind of it goes like it's a very interesting question to me. So on one hand, I heard different I guess perspectives on this. On one hand, all this accumulated knowledge brings a lot of value to your next role or your next employer, right? But on the other hand, I also heard some from like almost like behind the scenes thinking about this additional experience from the company side about like what's called ageism, right?
Right.
And when companies, some companies at least, are actually maybe they're, I don't know, it's like actually I don't know the rationale behind this. I can guess that they're afraid that the person that has been around for some time, their pace of learning kind of slows down. Maybe that's kind of the only, I guess, hypothesis that I have. Like, I'm not sure like why, but the question for you is maybe you have an insight into this. And have you experienced any ageism in your career?
Another big question. I mean, I would say uh, I have felt uh,
Mm,
I've felt people caring about my age
mm,
in at work, in teams. Uh, I remember back in more than a few years, like the first time I heard someone say something, which most people thought you would know that you couldn't say something like, "Well, he's old."
mhm.
Um,
Not in a good way.
not in a good way,
Uh,
no. And So it's there. I do think back to the limitations of our own brain, and the you know the prejudices that are in there, are there, right? And so there's, I think in general we tend to be a little bit biased towards belief that youth is a more innovative
Mm,
thing to have around. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's something you got to watch for. I do find that in my own career, I have, after hearing it a few times, I started to share with fewer people my actual age.
really?
I
Mm,
wouldn't bring it up, and I would more than happy to let people think of it. I was at a certain age. I did tend to focus much more in my conversations on my strengths. So, what can I do faster and smarter than someone else? How can I bring more value
hmm
to the table? Um, where maybe someone can do, maybe someone can rip through Figma prototypes faster, but I can think through the business concept behind the prototype faster. And so I might only have one or two ideas where the other person may have three or four, but my one or two ideas tend to tie better into a business model, tie better into a revenue stream, or have been thought through further in greater depth around the user needs. And so I do think you have to keep thinking about how are you going to bring value. I also think it's just really bad. I think one of the worst bits of ageism that at least I faced was my own, was me kind of thinking, oh, I'm old now, you can't
mm,
do these things. And I would say even just a couple of years ago, I was kind of freaking out about learning another, like my fifth prototyping tool I was going to work through. And if like it was the fifth in like 2 years that we had been shifting,
oof.
and I was like, oh man, I can't believe I got to go through another learning curve. And I was like half apologizing for my work at times that I wasn't working as fast. And it was people around me saying, dude, your ideas are solid. What are you talking about?
Hmm.
So be aware that self-talk can be really dangerous too, because you can start uh, discounting your own contribution, being ageist against yourself, and saying that I'm too old to do this. I'm too old to do this. Where I do think the other plus for navigating all these learning things, it improves neural elasticity. And I love to read and learn because I love to read and learn. That's who I am. And so having a career that almost requires me to do it it's a
Perfect match.
perfect match. Right.
So, do you have any pro tips on how to avoid this self-talk about when people think that they're old for something like this?
I mean, I do think it goes back to connecting with people a lot. So making sure that you're connecting with people that are peers and in your company. I find um, one of the benefits, or one of the most fulfilling activities I have because of my career, my history, is mentoring. And I find that when I mentor, I also remind myself that, boy, what I'm doing has value.
Mm,
And so it reminds
that's a
me
good
that
idea.
I have skills, I have knowledge, I have
Yeah,
things that people want. And so
that's true.
I believe that it's, uh, I know this is going to sound very sort of new age, but you, I believe that the way you grow your career is by giving your experience away, giving it to people, help people understand what they can do, help them feel empowered. That stuff always boomerangs back. It always comes back. And so I'm a very active mentor right now. I've got 9 people that I mentor. Um, and I'm always cycling through people in different capacities, and uh, you basically, to me, it keeps new ideas, new thoughts, new opinions about me coming into the flow. I I do one of the things that it's kind of a weird bit of career advice, but I do think it's quite helpful. Is that if you really know who you are, take the time to know who you are and what matters to you. I believe there are things called talents, which are things that are innate in you, things you like. Things likely were said about you when you were a child. Oh, he's so creative, or he's so fun. He's so
Hmm.
inquisitive. He's quiet,
He's
but
such
he's
a
a really
jerk.
deep thinker. They're things that
That's
are
my
the
superpower.
essence of you, right? What'd you say?
Uh, he is such a jerk. That's my superpower then.
Yeah, there you go. He's a jerk. That's your superpower right there.
He should work in
Um,
sales then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You have a career, my son. But I think when you know these things, and then you have these things called skills. Now, too often our careers we focus on the skills we've acquired, but skills are all acquirable. You can get them. You can learn them. They're things you can do. Um, if you work with your talents, if your job ties into your talents, you will be happy. And if you're happy, you'll invest yourself into it. And when you invest yourself into it, you will succeed. And so, back to when I made a bit of a change in my career path, I'd have conversations with people during interviews, and people would say, "Well, where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I'm like, "Well, I can tell you, if you're looking for somebody who's going to run the department, I'm probably not that person. But what I'll be doing is I'm going to contribute the best value at this level because this is what I want to do. This is what matters to me."
Hmm.
And it, I don't know, it made interviewing much clearer. When I would interview for something and they would say, like I mentioned before, I'm not a steward. I love problems. I want new, interesting challenges regularly. If I'm interviewing for a job and they're really defining a steward, it was very easy for me to say to them, this is really interesting, but this really isn't my strength. My strength is over here. And do you need that? And sometimes they say yes, and it's another role. Sometimes they say no. But it comes from the fact that I don't want to take a job that I don't want, that doesn't look like me, right? That doesn't, because all it means is all I'm doing is choosing to torture myself for a year or two until I find another job after that. And so I do think the best bit of career advice at any age is know who you are, know what matters to you, have your priorities straight, and don't be afraid to talk directly to people and share intelligently with them.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing advice to. It kind of assumes that you know yourself well enough. Uh, what I found though is especially for somebody who's early in their career and maybe like early in their life, like who just graduated from like a college or
College. Yeah.
university, at least kind of even like remembering myself, I had no idea who I was and what I would love to be doing and what I would hate to be doing. So what I usually recommend to folks who are just starting out is to actually by trial and error help themselves kind of really learn about themselves
Hmm.
and learn like what they love and what they don't love. And I went through many different jobs and even like professions and different roles in different companies, almost like navigating this journey. And every role helped me learn about myself, what I was actually would love to do more and what I would love to do less, or at least not do at all sometimes. And even like yeah, so every role helped me learn something about myself. And like the key advice that I would give like for juniors who are starting out, actually try and prioritize diversity of different roles, different environments, different team sizes, different company types, like startups, enterprise, the agency, like all the different types of the companies and industries would bring different, almost like uncover that another piece of the puzzle that you are trying to kind of work through and help you learn about like your personal preferences and yeah, your strengths and weaknesses that you should consider.
I think that's great advice, and I do agree that, I mean, when I started out, I didn't know either, and I was just desperate for a job. I really wanted to get going in my career.
Yeah,
Um, I do think what I learned later on is just good, that to ask questions. So ask yourself, if you don't like something, why? What is it about that boss that you don't like? Is it
yeah,
they micromanage? Okay, well, you don't. So note to self: I need bosses that believe in autonomy. Okay, what is it about that organization you don't like? Uh, they um, they're always demanding more time. Okay. Well, okay. Have I tried asking if they could do with less time? Is there a role I could play here? Could I actually and see what happens? But I think it's a lot of it is about paying attention and collect it. I also think when I said about knowing yourself, I'm still learning about myself. So I think it's a lifelong journey to keep asking the questions because also your life changes, right? You know, at one point in my life, all I wanted to do was live in the middle of a major city.
Mm.
And now I'm at a point where what I really want to do is to, get a home in the country and work remotely. So that's a simple example of what matters. Um, so yeah, I think it's true. You're not gonna. It's not a form to fill out. It's not a quiz you can take. It's not a single book you
Damn
can
it!
read that's going to have those answers.
I was hoping there was
Um,
one.
it's a it's a journey, and but
Yeah,
you just have to ask and notice. I mean, I do. I guess I
yeah.
find it's amazing how often some of the people I mentor who they'll say they're in a tough situation. And I'm like, have you told anybody? Like, well, no. Well, how did you think
Mm.
it was going to change? So, paying attention, having conversations, owning your position, and noticing what's going on. I think it's another bit of.
Hmm.
It's hard,
Yeah, and
but
it takes
but it's
time.
helpful. It
It
takes
takes
time to get
time. Yeah,
competent.
for
Yeah.
sure. And it's kind of because I just also remembered about this, and last comment on this topic, and then
Okay.
we can wrap up with the final question.
Okay.
Um, my son, who is almost 14 years old, kind of has started like maybe a year ago, kind of asking me like how did I learn like what I love doing and like whom to be like as a profession,
Yeah.
as a work, as like all this stuff. And because and I, like I remember also my struggles with this question actually when I was I think like after 15, 16, 17 maybe, like right before university. And even like after when I graduated, I had no idea 5 years later like what exactly. And yeah, just kind of really yeah, trial and error. And it takes time, and it takes um, like you get bumps from all these
Hmm.
experiences that you also learn from, right? It's not always like always positive. So I've had bad managers in my experience in my career that I learned probably even more from
Right.
what not to do, what not how not to be a manager or like a leader, and just even like a person, a human being. So it's yeah, it's slow. It's a slow process. But I think probably like what I would probably like a lesson for like for myself and advice for myself, like a younger self, would be to try to optimize for variety and
Yeah.
diversity. So instead of kind of staying in like one role for 2 years, for example, right, like in the same situation without like any changes, except for like maybe like just particular job changes, kind of upgrades. Um, I would actually probably go the route of kind of trying a different company because I think diversity definitely helps bring more ideas and more kind of expands your horizon, and also calibrates your understanding of how the world works, how different companies operate,
Yeah.
how yeah, what's important to other people, to other maybe team members, because it also kind of could be different depending on the different companies and structures. So I think variety is diversity is interesting. But going back to the kind of the comment about the ageism, right? And
Yeah.
what I wanted to mention that kind of fascinating to me that some people dismiss age as like as almost like a negative, right? Like you're old or something like this. When I say it as more like a wise, and because that person brings, I mean, like fair enough, they also bring their own biases, but they also bring a huge ton of learnings and takeaways from completely different environments, right?
Right.
So and like I always question when, for example, a company who is trying to advertise their culture as like we're diverse and all that stuff, when they focus just on one dimension of diversity, like genders, right, as like the most maybe common ones, like how many females we have, how many males we have
Yeah.
in like leadership positions, all this stuff. but they ignore all the other types of diversity, like cultures and age. I think is a huge one that really brings completely different set of perspectives and experiences, right? Like that youngsters would not really understand, or like other kind of age groups. So I think it's all for the benefit of really bringing more different ideas that eventually will boil together and fuse together, and the result in a better experience than just more kind of uh, homogenized cohort
Yeah.
of folks. Yeah, so it's
Well,
kind of I don't get it.
I think one of the interesting things about the contrast between the US and Europe is, in general, over here, gray hair is respected. And so I say in general, I get more,
I should dye my hair probably.
there you go. Eh, Gray makes you look wise. Um, in general, I would say that it's a little more of a
Norm.
accepted strength rather
Mm.
than
Oh, even strength.
a
Mm.
weakness. Yeah, I think for exactly what you said, it's history. It's what you're bringing to the table. You've got all this work history,
Yeah, you've made a
and
bunch of mistakes, and you learn from them, hopefully. So
and
help us not repeat these mistakes.
or at least find a new flavor for it. Um, you'd also said that if you looked at my entire resume, how interesting, how many changes I had,
Hmm.
and you were just talking about trying things. I made a conscious decision early in my career that I wanted to have this sort of renaissance career. I wanted to try things. And so when I was given the opportunity to make a change that could be interesting, I would go in that direction. Cool. So, I worked for a design firm, and then I worked for an advertising agency, and then I worked for a pharmaceutical company, and then I had my own company, and then I worked for a, a charitable giving company, and
Mm.
then I became a consultant, and then I worked for an insurance company, a financial services company. So it to
Diversity.
me it was very interesting how these environments change,
Yeah.
and big places that are specialized, conservative industries like financial services versus like the pharmaceutical industry had a lot of money and was investing in things like physicians online, one of the first uh, uh, private networks for using the internet, and it was kind of super cool to play with these things. But usually after I got to a certain point, I was like, oh, there's something else interesting, I'm going to go over there and learn that. And so I would say if you wanted to draw something from my career, is that I always took jobs I could learn from.
Hmm. It reminds me of a recent, not a trend, but some kind of maybe like a Twitter thread that I saw. There was a photo, I think, of a book cover or like a page on a book with a question: when was the last time you did something for the first time? And
Great
this kind of
question.
like reminds me of this kind of really reframing your mindset to kind of really be learning and like trying to even like seek out those new opportunities to learn, because every next new first time would be another opportunity to learn. Yeah, I
There's
think it's
a
a good approach.
there's a Zen concept called beginner's mind, and I love it. I practice it a lot, which is it is great. That feeling of when you do something new is you notice everything,
Hmm. Yeah,
and so that's it's really interesting
still
to kind
fresh.
of
Yeah.
be in something that's like, why did that happen? That's cool, and
Hmm.
see it all. So
Awesome. So last question, which is kind of almost touching on one of the comments that you mentioned, that like when you were learning about yourself, right? Like, and that you are still learning about what you love, what you don't love, or what you
yep.
want to do more or less. If money wasn't a question, what would you do?
If money wasn't a question, I'd probably be a full-time artist, but I would continue to mentor people early in their career and get to talk about my experience and try to help them start, because I do find it very interesting to talk to younger people or people in different points in their career where I can apply the knowledge.
What
Um,
kind of artist?
uh, likely watercolor
Anything?
painting. You
Mm,
see some figurative works behind me.
mhm.
I've done that too. I really do like painting. I've become quite fond of it, and I do landscapes, nature, those kinds of things. I find them very peaceful. I love. It's kind of the same thing since we like analysis and what we do. My paintings, I tend to like to dive into detail, so I love very
Realistic.
detailed works that I can climb into.
Mm. Not
I
like
think
a black square type of
not right now,
pictures.
not a black square, though I'm not nothing against that.
Nothing.
I definitely have dabbled in abstracts, but I find the representative works more satisfying.
Yeah.
I think
And
that there's a an anecdote that I'm thinking of right now that to me is really important to my life, and the
mm,
anecdote is it's a story about Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, two authors, going to a house in the Hamptons, a billionaire's house in the Hamptons, um, and enjoying a party there, some sort of special, uh, gathering of elites. And uh, Vonnegut is supposedly says to Heller, looking at this, saying that the the money for this party likely exceeds all the money you made off of writing Catch 22.
mm,
And Heller replied, "I have something that uh, I have something that he'll never have." And Vonnegut said, "What?" He goes, "Enough."
mm,
I think that's a really important thing, particularly for those in the competitive life where
mhm,
you're chasing something. Make sure what you're chasing is something you want. I think sometimes the up and to the right drive. Uh, Maybe one of the luckiest things I had was starting that business when I was relatively young and selling it when I was relatively young
mm,
because I got there. And then I got there and I'm like, well, there's not a lot of there. I'm here, but I don't know that I want more of this.
mm,
Um, so I think understanding what's enough for you, what do you care about?
mm.
Um, where sometimes a simpler life.
Yeah.
If money was no object, I would probably like a bit of a simpler life.
Interesting. Actually, it may and maybe it's just my cognitive bias working in action, but just recently, in the last few months, I started noticing uh, more and more people on LinkedIn almost like switching their professional, like director kind of, or even higher up levels of career to like a gardener part time or
Yeah,
something like this, because it's definitely an interesting concept and philosophical choice. And I think, yeah, you probably were lucky that you had a chance to experience what it's like like at that height, and you decide for yourself that it's not what you're looking for longer term. But yeah, like lots of like I just know lots of people, especially in the States and in this tech world, right? They're kind of trying to chase this, and even like in startups, they're trying to chase this either $1 trillion valuation, like with exit or IPO, or in a career, like a particular like a C level job. And then when they get there, like at the end of their life, it's almost like, hmm, was it worth it? And yeah, it's definitely a question to keep asking yourself if that's a right trajectory for you, if you want to do more of this, if that's really who you are, because it's so personal, right? So some people love it, some
yeah,
people don't. So it's there's no kind of right or wrong answer here.
exactly. The,
And I'm sure there are lots of people who thrive in this competitive culture at work
yep.
in the States, and lots of people who really prefer being a gardener. So it's yeah, it depends.
There's a actually I think there is a good article on LinkedIn about do you make your career decisions based on your resume? So do you make your life decisions based on your resume or your tombstone? Um, I mean, realize those things in your resume are likely not going to live beyond your life.
Hmm.
Um, and so but just once again, there's nothing wrong with it. I've got friends who are in the middle of that and have done really well for themselves, and that's a perfect life for them. But I also know people who have amazing pedigrees, have done great things, have invented things, have PhDs, and they drive a taxi. Why? Because they like people and they
Mm,
like having dinner with their family every night. These are all just back to its trade-offs, but it comes back to what matters. What's enough for you? What's the thing that you want to be known for?
yeah,
So I don't know. I think it's a very personal decision, and it doesn't also mean that if you choose the competitive life, that doesn't mean you
it's
don't care
for
about
life.
your
Yeah.
family.
Hmm.
It's not a yes or no. It's just yeah. But then you have to make other choices, and once again, it's a trade off. It's not a good and bad, right and wrong choice.
Hmm.
It's what works for you.
Yeah, that's true. That reminds me. And last comment, and let's wrap up. Have you heard of a story about a fisherman in a Mexican village or something?
I don't think so.
Oh, that's amazing. I think it sounds like one of those Eastern spiritual stories that kind of should help you learn, at least ask yourself a question. Well, let's put it this way. Well, and I'll share it in the show notes and
Yeah,
with you after. But in a concise version, so a super smart, like MBA kind of business person comes to a village, like for a vacation, comes to a village in Mexico and speaks with a fisherman who's just kind of living in this village, and he was like recommending to grow his fishing business to like a fleet, to go to like to all the steps of building a business, like IPO, and then
yeah,
get rich. And then the last question was like, and what do I do when I get rich? You move to a small village in Mexico
yeah.
and, and enjoy your life with family and kids and stuff like this and friends. So it's kind of it's I love it. It's kind of yeah, yeah,
But
interesting.
yeah, but I think that's to me that's what you just that story is about the irrationality of uh, thinking that everybody has to you know
Yeah.
chase the dollar, chase the money,
Why? Yeah.
because you know it's we know money doesn't buy happiness beyond the level that you're just being able to take care of your own needs. Money doesn't buy happiness. Yes, it will help you with happiness if you don't have enough to live on.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, and we see in the news people that are very unhappy but are extraordinarily wealthy. And it's like, yeah, it's your choice. People who chase fame and find out that when they got to fame, they hate it. They want anonymity. They want to do something, and so they move away from Hollywood, or
Hmm.
they go quiet, they go dark in terms of staying out of the limelight. Um, so I don't think there's like in any way there's one measure of success. I think the only person who should be keeping score is you. That's the only score that should matter.
Hmm.
And are you making decisions that um, will take care of you, and you know feed yourself, take care of your family if you have a family to take care of, and then what you've got left is what you can give to something like a career.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Okay, where folks can find you if they want to reach out?
Oh, I guess I should have thought through that question. Um,
I know you have an Instagram and
yeah, I do have you can find me on Instagram. And that's primarily my art, which is Paul J. Bryant Artist.
mhm.
Um, uh, I'm also that's my same handle on TikTok. Um, you also can find me, as Kira brought up, on LinkedIn. If you want to talk to me about career stuff, you can find me there. I think those two would be good. And I guess I do have a website, pauljbryant.com.
Sounds good. All the links will be in the show notes. Awesome. Okay, Brian, it was a long conversation, but packed with very interesting topics and advice, and I loved it. It was very,
It was
very
fun.
interesting to me. Yeah, it was fun.